Well, today what we want to do is actually have a conversation about our linkable content, the difference between linkable content and keyword-rich content, and really dive in and pull out the differences to see what we need to do to create that linkable content. How do we get a site really ready for link building? So to start, what I like to do, Norm and Kim, is ask you just a few questions. What is the difference? What's like one of the key differences between linkable content and keyword-rich content?
Just one key difference. You go first, and then I'll pick a different key.
I mean, it's not always a black and white difference, because as far as we're concerned, any content worth creating is worth optimizing for the relevant keywords.
Like linkable content and keyword-rich content will have keywords associated with both products.
Yeah, any content will have keywords that best describe what it's about, what the purpose of the page is. But when we create linkable content, we're less concerned with selecting the keywords that are most closely associated with a site's products or services. From a searcher intent standpoint, we're less focused on overcoming barriers to conversion or making a sale. It's just interesting content for their audience among other people online. So that's the purpose of linkable content. When it's keyword focused exclusively, we're not looking for maximum relevance to the majority of the web. We're looking for relevance exclusively to their products and services or their target audience, the qualified visitor who's most likely to become a client or customer.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the difference that I notice most of the time is whenever I'm reading a piece of linkable content, I can always tell that that's the purpose of the content as we created it. It appeals to, or could potentially appeal to, a wide variety of audiences. But every time I read keyword-focused content, it usually falls into a couple of different buckets, but it will either be like maybe definitional, or it will be further down the funnel, and I could tell that it would take a more informed audience to want to deliberately be reading that piece.
Sure. Okay, that's good. Thank you. So with the differences there, and we'll take a few steps back and talk about linkable content here in just a second, but can you link to, on a regular basis, I should say, can we constantly link to very keyword focused content?
Not consistently.
No.
Sometimes. And those are happy accidents when you're in an industry that's interesting or relevant to a lot of people. But more often, the linkable content is distinct from the really keyword-driven content.
Like, very distinct.
So why wouldn't a webmaster typically link to a very keyword-focused piece?
Well, if we were using a keyword-focused piece for link building, it would likely trip up a webmaster because it would look advertorial.
Okay.
It would come across as deliberately placed within the article. So rather than serving the reader of the article or their user experience, it looks like it is clearly in there for some other reason.
Right.
And so that's why it would be challenging. It's hard to make that look natural because in link building content, it's usually top funnel content. It's rare that it's like further down the funnel or more advanced content. And so if you throw a piece that's very like further down the funnel, mid funnel, or very in depth on a topic, then it just doesn't look like a match.
Sure. Okay. Any add to that?
It's free advertising.
Yeah.
The question you have to answer to place any link that you want pointing to your content is, from the webmaster's view, from the owner's view, what's in it for me, what's in it for my readers. If the only purpose of the link, the only value that it's going to deliver is back to you, that's not a very compelling reason for anyone to link to you. So anything that's advertorial, that seems like it's putting readers in a sales funnel, that's pushing them towards conversion, that doesn't add value. That's just trying to take their attention, their viewership, and add it to your conversion pipeline. If you have something of value, you have interesting original research, you provide expert commentary, something that's citation worthy, then the answer to the question is self-explanatory. This is worth including because it makes your content better. It elaborates on whatever the purpose of your site is or whatever the purpose of a page is. They don't have to question your motives because they're getting something out of it up front. That's linkable content.
And with keyword content, if you were to include it in an article, there are times where you could make it feel completely organic and relevant, but the subject of that article would be very specific and very niche, and that just doesn't lend itself to sustainability within a campaign.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So, kind of feeding off of that, a lot of people, when I talk to them, and a lot of clients that we have discussions with, mention they have very linkable content. They've been working hard on additional content. And one of the things oftentimes happens because they're speaking to a very specific audience, maybe even a geo-targeted audience in a specific state. They'll talk about, and we'll just use plumbing for an example. They'll talk about plumbing in Houston, Texas, and they do post these articles on the blog, and it is fairly informational content. It's not hire us because we're the best plumbers, but it is talking about plumbing specifically in Texas, in Houston, Texas. Why does that create barriers for link building?
Well, link building to geo-specific content can be extremely challenging. And that's because we might be building on a blog that isn't in Texas, or we might be speaking to an audience that isn't in Texas, but we're trying to provide, value to this site that has, content only about plumbing in Texas. I think that's why it's extremely important to have a well-defined funnel of content. I do think that it's relevant to have geo-specific or location-specific content on your site, but it can't be the only means by which you're looking to obtain links or funnel your traffic. And I do think it's important to note that good content, it shouldn't be what your heart tells you is good content, or you as a person feel in your innermost soul is good content. It needs to be data-driven good content. It needs to be, what are people searching for? What are the audiences out there that you're targeting? And then how are you going to go about that? And that should inform the content, the wide variety of content that you create. So sure, there is probably, I'm assuming without looking at the data, but there is probably a niche for, specific, geo-specific content. But then there's this whole other, these entire other groups that you are excluding by only targeting that group.
Yeah, it's purely a question of relevance. Because there's different layers of relevance. Your geo-specific content, your plumber in Houston, if that was the example, that's really relevant to what they do and who they are. But from an online audience perspective, it's only relevant to someone who is searching for those solutions. You're in Houston and you need a plumber. That's how you get conversions, that's how you get qualified traffic, but that's not how you get links. What's relevant to a lot of people would be a general plumbing topic. Something related to housing, disaster cleanup, toilets, right? There's one in every building. So when you talk about those topics of universal appeal, they're still relevant to you as a plumber, as an expert, as an authority on what you do, but then you're not limiting yourself to only people actively searching for your services or who are only in your area. So you can talk about relevance to who you are and what you do and who's going to give you money, basically. But from a link building perspective, we're more interested in how relevant are you to the rest of the web? How relevant are you to people who don't want to give you free advertising? When you have a compelling answer to that, then you have linkable content. And the most relevance dilating way to write is usually not limited to one city or even one state. And depending on the topic, it may not even be one country.
Sure.
And I think people's biggest concern is we're only in Houston. I don't want to write content, that's general or going to bring people in, visitors from other states because we can't serve them. It's not our target audience. But the point is that you create this content and it's packed with internal links to those converting pages that you do care about, and it helps you then funnel that juice throughout the rest of your site, and it helps expand the overall authority of your site within the realm of plumbing sites, within the realm of plumbing problems or whatever it is that big head term covers. And then it just contributes to the foundation. So you need all of it. If you just focus on any one facet of it, really, you're selling yourself short.
Sure.
Yeah. If you only write about general plumbing topics, then you're not expressing that you are in Houston and that you are a solution.
And
So
associating yourself with
exactly.
that. Yeah.
You can't go all in on just one element of who you are and how you're brand building. Which is why when we do keyword focused content, that would be Houston, that would be geo-specific, that would be services or problems or whatever. When we're doing linkable content, it's still going to be notionally relevant to plumbing, but it'll be more generally accessible. It'll be something of interest to anyone who's wondered what happens when you flush, or how often you need to change out a shower head. I don't know. Whatever is a universal experience, that is what makes you relevant to the rest of the web.
And helps establish your authority within that niche, which I think is ultimately what clients would be looking for with that.
Yeah, for sure. So when they're building this content, they're going to have their very bottom funnel, which will be their product pages, their service pages, like click here, buy now,
Converting.
Yeah, money changing hands.
Then you have like your mid funnel, which is more of like these issues in Houston, or this is or reviews of certain products and things like that. It's more of like you're getting more. They're closer to buying, not quite ready to buy, but at least they're targeting. Their focus is on more of a target. And then you have the top of the funnel, which is they're looking at updating their home, and they're looking for a very specific or more of a broad range of things that they can do to update their home. Maybe they just moved in, and some of the upgrades to get their home more modern, and shower heads and toilets and things like that might be part of that, which does have a relevancy to plumbing, but speaks to a huge audience, and is not someone typically isn't going to click on and be like, okay, I'm ready to hire a plumber in Houston, but it is speaking to the larger audience, allowing us to get those links and then build that authority of that site. Is that correct?
Your top funnel it's educational, it's interesting, it lends itself to discovery. People who need a plumber are part of the audience, but they're not the only part. Maybe not even the majority. When you get to the mid funnel, that's more decision making, comparison shopping. You're getting a more narrow focus on people who need a plumber. There might be a few other people there, people who aren't ultimately going to become customers or clients, but you're being more explicit about plumbing being a solution or your brand being a solution. And then bottom funnel is either call for more information or let's exchange money and services.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
And I would say that even at the top funnel, you're not just speaking to the audience, but you're also, like, all of that content speaks to the search engines. It tells them what your page is about, what you care about, what you want to be associated with.
And I think that's a very key thing to really point out is oftentimes when we are building content, and correct me if I'm wrong, but here at Page One Power, when we're building content, we are looking at speaking to the search engines. And so we're not always saying this piece has such a hyper relevancy to everything that you do and speaks, and it is your it is your voice, and this is exactly what your company does, but it's serving additional purposes outside of just here's our services and here's what we do. And if it's not exactly A, B, and C, it doesn't belong on the site. Is that?
I define SEO as serving humans and accommodating machines.
Okay.
The search engines, the algorithms, they don't understand content the way someone who needs a plumber does necessarily. So to achieve optimization, the O of SEO, you want to understand how the bots, the algorithms will process that information while remaining useful and meaningful to the actual human, the searcher,
Mhm.
the one who hits the little
Sure.
magnifying glass to get the SERPs out.
Mhm.
So no content that's made for the web is optimized if it's only serving one or the other. So really poor, unlinkable, useless content, it might be very keyword rich, but it's not for a real human audience. So it's not
Okay.
truly optimized.
Mhm.
Likewise, you might write a really great article about plumbing in Houston, but if it's not coherent, if the HTML isn't laid out correctly, the different meta elements on the page aren't done correctly, it's not really optimized for the search engines, or by extension, the people who use search engines. So Page One Power is on a teeter-totter basically, where we're trying to figure out how do we serve both of these masters as equitably as possible with every piece of content.
Okay.
And that, I think, is the mistake that a lot of marketers, a lot of site owners, a lot of graphic designers make. They think in terms of, well, I need to make this sell, so I'm just going to focus on how do I get this person to convert.
Mhm.
And it's too human and the machine can't make sense of it. Or they go, well, I know I need my keyword density to be 10% or whatever. And they focus too much on something they know is a ranking factor, but not in a way that serves humans. So they've gone all in on telling the bot what the page is about without adding any real value for a human user.
Okay.
So with that as the definition, that informs all of the content that we do, all of the work that we do.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, Norm. So let's take a couple steps back here and let's talk about just linkable content. So an example I gave last month in my newsletter, we talked about tires and how I shopped for tires. And I apologize for the review here real quick, but I saw two different pieces of content, two different sites. One was fall driving tips, which, okay, great title. It's probably talking to an audience that's outside of just tires.
Mhm.
But every bullet point was air pressure, check your tread. Everything was tires related, and it was 3 or 4 paragraphs long. Not very in depth.
Sure.
Great title, great start.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then the other one that I noticed on a different site was getting your teen ready for driving school.
That was the topic I was thinking of.
Yeah.
That'd be a good topic.
And it was a lot longer form. No, it wasn't like insane. It wasn't like a giant guide or anything like
Right.
that. But it wasn't. There wasn't a lot of mention of tires even
Right.
in the article. And so when I talk to people, a lot of the time they get the title. They're like, "What about this title?" And I'm like, "That sounds great. Like that sounds like a great title." And then they go and they write. And then they send it and they're like, "Hey Harris, I'm ready. I've got content for you." And they send it to me, and and I'm not trying to say word length is a huge
Right.
thing, but it's like 200 or 300 words, and it's still like they have a hard time separating. They're like, "I'm tires," and so my mind instantly goes to
Right.
tires, and all I can think about, breathe, sleep is tires, and they have the hardest time getting out of those weeds and like getting above that tree and be like, "Oh no, there is a bigger world out here. The world is not all about tires."
That's pretty
let's talk-
typical.
Okay, so topics are a big key, right?
Sure.
They are a key, I would say.
A key. So how do we go about creating that content outside of just the title? Is there a link that we need to follow? Is there, certain, should we always have 7 tips for doing this or the 7 best places for doing that?
There's not a lot of good always advice in SEO.
Okay.
There are a couple,
There are a
couple of
few.
nuggets. Yeah, but
They're
in terms
really
of like
broad.
every single time across the board, this many words, this
Mhm.
many tips, this many, you won't find anything like that. But we can provide like some general, like the guidelines that we follow when we produce
Okay.
content that we adhere to. And even then, we just broke it the other day. We created some content, and I was like, this is like below the minimum that I like to see content at. And Norm was like, I know, but like it's, if we go any further, it'll make it too fluffy, and we don't want to do that. And in the inside, I was sweating. But on the outside, I was like, okay, here we go. So it's one of those things where there's never a hard and fast almost. But certainly there are a couple of things. I think one of the most important things like that we will probably return back to, I'm sure Norm will in his points, is like the data behind the piece that you are writing, like who is the audience that you are targeting, and then the keywords that you're looking to serve to I am assuming to best reach that audience, and then what exists out there, like what you're trying to put forward. So like, what are your competitors doing? When you put that topic that you found into Google, like what actually comes up? Can you do better than that? Are you looking to beat that or fill a gap that it has or something? You know, it's putting all of that data together to then sit down and outline and write the piece. And usually when you do that, you'll be well outside of 700 or 800 words. Across the board almost, but you know, there are exceptions like the one I just referred to.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean there's a handful of questions that are very common that are like there's a one-word answer. Should I do this thing? Yes, no. Who starred in that movie that one time? That's a name, right? Maybe a middle initial. But if your topic is tips, fall driving tips, or how to prepare your teen driver to be safe or whatever. That's an article. That's going to take some explaining. And the two questions that absolutely... Here's an always for you.
Okay.
The questions you always have to answer before you start working and then after you've finished working on content is, who is it for? Who's the audience? What actual human person is going to read this? Should be a group, not just one individual. And then, what is the point? What's the purpose? What will they have gained if my target audience actually reads this? So for your example of fall driving tips, and they all have to do with tires, does that really give someone the best advice for fall driving? No, that's not really satisfying the topic. Does it make you feel really keyword optimized and I understand how this is going to help me sell tires? Yeah, but to go back to my earlier point, you're satisfying what the bots are looking for without satisfying what actual human readers are looking for.
Yeah.
So, great topic, poor execution. Because good execution is kind of putting the humans first and going, how do I give them what they're looking for? And then within that space, figure out, how do I make sure the bots recognize what I've done for human users? That's the balance. Sometimes that means lengthy, detailed, extensive content. Sometimes you can be a lot more precision focused and still deliver a good answer. But there's no better tool to research where you need to fall than Google itself. If you've come up with a good topic, which is frankly not hard to do, coming up with a topic is the easiest part.
Right.
What does it take to deliver on that topic well? Better than what currently passes as a good result in Google. Well, you got to see what the competition is doing if you want to beat them. And if you have a topic, anyone who ranks is competition. Doesn't matter how they make their money. Although clearly you don't want to pass value or just rip off your competitors. But you do want to see what is passing for a good result. How long is it? How detailed is it? What other topics are they bringing up? Not just the one that led you to it. I sell tires. Tires matter for fall driving. But what represents a comprehensive, well-rounded, detailed answer? It's not going to be 7 bullet points about tires. Tires will come up. So a lot of other things.
Right.
And that second piece that you mentioned, they didn't mention tires at all, right? Or
no, I think there was definitely some mentions, but it was not like a bullet point. Tires definitely in the article, no question. Yeah. But it was not a key component of the article whatsoever.
Right. And so I think that kind of swings it back, like you want to make sure that you don't over-optimize, but that you don't undersell like the entire purpose of the piece that you're creating too. It can go both ways sometimes, and I think that you fall into the underselling your point category sometimes when you write the thing that feels like super interesting. You're like, I'm going to write like a top funnel article and it's going to be great and it's going to be about teaching teen driving safety, and then you just miss the point about including also you as the provider somewhere in there in a meaningful way.
That other layer of relevance. It has to be relevant enough to what you do and who you are that it makes sense that you would be writing it in the first place, that you would join that conversation. Right. If I'm trying to sell tires and I write an article about 5 apple pie recipes that grandma would approve of, That's pretty linkable content. We can point links to that. A lot of people will find it helpful and useful and interesting. It's going to be hard for me to talk about tires. So it matches one layer of relevance, but not that other.
Sure.
It has to connect to the rest of your website.
And a way that we work to connect that relevancy, or even connect the value of the links that we're doing, and the work that we're doing is pushed further into the site, is that internal linking structure. So in teen driving and how to get your teen ready for driving, opportunities might have been missed there for internal links to get them to, additional content or even tire pages in and of themselves. Do you recommend doing internal links specifically to product pages?
Sure.
When applicable, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, and I think like even in that article, you mentioned it, maybe like it wasn't even a bullet point or anything, like that's a missed opportunity to optimize for an H2. I feel like an opportunity to create an extra layer of SEO or like search engine facing optimization that they could have had in that piece.
Okay.
So I would say yes and yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. I mean, if you're creating this content because you know you can't get links directly to your converting pages, it would make sense to point out how those converting pages are relevant to it. If that's the page that's going to get the links, you want to pass the authority as directly and meaningfully as possible to those target pages. I call it stunt doubles a lot. It's just an informal thing, but it's like we can't get the links we need to these guys. They can't go out there and take the licks and do the stunts. We've got this great top funnel blog content. It can go out there. It can be the kind of broad web face of the company that goes, hey, these are helpful folks. They know about a lot of stuff. They're interesting. They're accessible. Give them a link. And then once we've earned that link, pass it internally to whatever's relevant, whatever's important to you.
Perfect. Thank you. So the last point I wanted to bring up is the other hold up or concern I see in content that I'm reviewing to make sure it is linkable is sometimes they get the title right, they start the article out strong, and you're like, yes, this is great, and you're like 2 or 3 paragraphs in, and then it just dies. I mean, it just like, and it's like they're writing, and either they get writer's block, or they're like, I've got 27,000 other tasks I gotta get done, and they quickly wrap it up and they walk away. You can just kind of see that the research and everything's fizzled out, or they get very opinionated, or they get all of a sudden sucked back into the weeds, and now it's back to tires, and that's all we're gonna talk about is tires. So, and something that you've mentioned a few times on calls that I've been on with you, Norm, is how the research that we do, and we're trying to even just get the basic outline, is we're really looking at digging deep from top to bottom of the article, that everything from the very beginning portion, from figuring out the title all the way down to the conclusion of the article, we are we're doing research to back that up. Is there any even just advice there on how to keep the, we want to make sure the article is created to get the point across and doesn't just draw, keep going on and on and on. So how do we keep that enthusiasm throughout the whole article, or tips to keep that throughout the entire article so they can close it strong? So when a webmaster does review it, they're not like, this started great, but then they've lost it, and there's way better other resources out there for us to link to than this.
I mean, I can think of 2 things off the top of my head. One I've already emphasized before, and that's the 2 questions you have to answer within a page. You don't just answer it with the opening sentence, what is the point of this page? Or who is this for? If you change your answer halfway through, you go from top funnel, informative, linkable content to, well, I really got to pitch my product, I've got product to move, then you've compromised on your answer. You went from having one answer to, well, the purpose is to help me sell sell tires, right? That's not a good answer. Those 2 questions, they should be immediate, easy, concise answers. Who it's for and what the purpose is. The more purposes you try to serve, the less likely you are to achieve any of them. So don't do that. The other thing, and this can be a little counterintuitive, but when you're reading web content, most people skim, right?
Mhm.
You've got a 1,000 word article. They're not going to read every word and every comma and everything. They're usually going to skim. Well, bots kind of do the same thing, right? They digest the HTML basically instantaneously. But the thing that's counterintuitive about that is if someone's skimming, they're going to look at the headers, they're going to look at the bold text, they're going to skim for the bullet point. You know, what's the meat? You know, what's the TLDR? And if you think about your content that way, then all of the headers matter. They're equally important because depending on what someone's looking for or what preconceived notion they have about what the title was, they might find the best bullet point, the best action item, or the best part answer, and that last header or that last point. So if you peter off halfway through, you're kind of assuming that they're going to stop reading halfway through. Readers might, skimmers probably won't.
Yeah.
So you want your content to hold up if it's going to be read end to end and satisfy that audience and serve that purpose. But you also want the big takeaways, those blocks of text, those section headers, those subtitles. You want those to be skimmable all the way through, equally relevant, equally necessary, equally satisfying to someone who's going to skim. So if you do that, keep an eye on what's the point and who's the audience, as well as it's well written all the way through, but it's also skimmable all the way through, so you can snip out those good juicy little tidbits and be happy. Both of those people are part of your audience, the skimmers and the readers. Most people are probably skimmers.
Yeah.
So you can't afford to give up halfway through.
That's great. Thank you. I like that. Those bullet points, the headers, set it up for skimmers and readers.
Yeah, all the pieces matter.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Kim, anything to add to that?
Well, if you only do something halfway, like then you might as well honestly not have done it at all. Like you just miss out on everything that you had set out to do. So it's definitely in your best interest to even make an outline if you find that helpful. It's what we do. We do outlines for every piece that we write, and it helps us to see very clearly what the trajectory of the article is, so that we don't wind up duplicating content or wondering how we're going to wrap things up or anything like that. And it's pretty time efficient in the long run. It saves you from writer's block or doing an article only halfway. And so I really think you should either do it to the best of your ability and the best that it can be, or just save yourself the trouble and don't do it at all.
50% is still a failing grade in most schools.
We still wouldn't be able to use it for link building, and or it's not going to be your competitors in the SERP if it's designed to be keyword focused. You're just not. It's going to sit there and be a half done piece of content for you to look at.
Right. No, I appreciate that. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to run through this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you, Harris.